Okay, in Chapter 8, we're going to talk about the concept of quality, and then in Chapter 9, we'll get into one or two applications of it. The first thing is defining quality, and that's a very interesting place to start. If you ask most people how would they define quality, most people would answer in terms of a type of application rather than a real definition. And that concept kind of goes all over the map. So we want to look at definition both in traditional terms, and then we want to address the service aspect of it. We want to talk about some quality measurements and standards such as the ISO 9000 and the Malcolm Baldrige Award, and then really discuss it in terms of supply chain applications as well. We said that in most supply chain processes and in most operation issues, there are four key objectives in operation: cost, flexibility, delivery, and quality. So that it's not necessarily the last one. They are all equally important, but quality has to be there in every step of the process. And it's everybody's responsibility. You can't just point the finger to some other part of the organization, say, well, that's their problem. Definition, here's a very loose one, a very broad one: meeting or exceeding customer requirements now and in the future. That is more comprehensive than it seems, because you have to define those requirements, and not in terms of just one point in time, on a continuous basis. In order to do that, you look at several dimensions, and you look at the abilities of who's supplying it, the conformance issues in terms of delivering what's required, the design aspect, and also what we call the field service or the logistical aspect of it. Quality of design is determined before the product's produced. If you wait, the old-fashioned way was to make it, inspect it, and then that's what's called inspecting quality into the product. It's a very costly way, and it causes you to go back and make a lot of changes. The purpose of concurrent design is this type of issues. Producing conformance really means producing a product to the specifications of the order and the customer. Obviously, if you don't do that right, not only the first time, but any time, you're going to constantly be incurring more costs. A lot of abilities of these supplier or provider become very important. How available are they for that service? How reliable are they? So you don't have too many unplanned breakdowns. What's their ability to maintain and service that product or service as well? All of these things are very important in selecting a supplier. Field service is a part of your total package in terms of what you offer, whether it's a product or a service. You have to be able to stand behind either the product or the service, and that means warranty or repair or replacement when needed, customer service on a timely basis, and especially giving the customer a warm feeling about your ability to be prompt, competent, and high integrity. We talked about different types of product. We mentioned design is one thing, conformance another, availability, field service. What that really says is the whole scope. When you evaluate somebody on their quality, sometimes if you find something wrong, it'll be on just one of those points. But more likely, when you determine who has good quality, you'll be looking at all of those things and saying that the supplier really is capable of providing good quality in every dimension. What we find in the service world, the measurements are very much perceptual or subjective. If you ask people how they evaluate a particular organization that serves you in a service manner, you're going to fall back on the representatives that you've had contact with, or even if it's through the internet or something, how responsive those people are. It's very much a subjective evaluation, which says, do you get satisfied whenever something happens? It's very different from saying they guarantee that nothing will ever happen, because that's not realistic. Quality cycle is what we've been talking about continuously. In order to get to the customer and have the customer have a very high quality perspective, customer really is going to look at the marketing aspect, the design and engineering aspect, the operations, and how you manage and control all that. The way to solve that problem, again, is through a concurrent engineering concept. An example in a mass transit system, you can see that you have counties, cities, many agencies that are involved in planning all this and laying out the specifications, but then they have to sit down with the individual departments and agencies that are responsible for different aspects of it and make sure that the process is controlled and complied with every step along the way. Implementing quality improvement within the cycle that we've talked about is very important. This is an attitude and a philosophy. You want to drive the concept of quality in every step in the process and with every participant in it. You want to take away the idea that somebody else is responsible for the quality. It's a team thing, and everybody's in it together. And the driver is really the customer and what their requirements are. So things like measuring all attributes, establishing the right tests for the standards, and corrective action are all important, as well as the continuous improvement aspect. There's some good examples which in the course of studying this subject we will be going into in more detail on a case study basis. Quality pioneers are important for you to understand. Probably two of the most important ones are Deming. I've obviously talked about him quite a bit. And almost concurrently was Joseph Juran, Deming focused a lot on productivity and processes and made equality a part of that. Juran actually was a more specialized person on the quality aspect and how that played into the process. You have had exposure to the 14 management principles. We talk about that in this course quite a bit. There are many other methods, including the CI methodology, and we'll study about that in the course too. The key in quality sense to solving quality problems is to look for the root cause. It's the difference between, the example I use is putting a Band-Aid on something for temporary fixes, or having to do major surgery to really solve the real problem. Once you have the root cause, you don't use Band-Aids. You try to solve it by fixing that, whether it's a major surgery type of thing or a minor one. Deming, interestingly enough, determined that 90% of quality problems are really caused by management and their expectations. So in this course we'll get into that in a little more detail. And Juran, on the other hand, was emphasizing the trilogy aspect of it, which says you need planning, control, and an improvement in order to achieve ultimate quality. So he's more systematic in that sense as opposed to Deming. An interesting concept is, many of you probably have heard things like close enough for government work and other types of sayings like that, which says you don't need perfection, you just get enough quality that's acceptable. Well, in today's world, especially with some of the technology impacts, some things do need near perfection. The spacecraft world, hospitals and medical systems, a lot, even automated manufacturing. Accuracy to the nth degree is very important. And there are many examples that the textbook talks about of how even 1% of quality failures could be damaging in many cases. How much is enough quality? Well, you have to look at each type of industry and make that determination on an industry by industry basis. As we said, in the spacecraft world, you could be off by a fraction of a degree and you're going to miss the moon if you're shooting for it. Okay? On the other hand, if you make a mistake, and even banks don't like to make mistakes of a penny, they often keep their tellers there for hours trying to find that penny because they're smart enough to know that the mistake may not be 1 cent. It could be a decimal point that could be thousands of dollars. And so you can see a lot of different industries that have to make their own determination. One thing that happened, probably in 20 or 30 years ago, these moving ahead in their emphasis on quality, and to a point where there was a disparity in the standards between things in the United States and other parts of the world, which, let's remember that many of those parts of the world were still in third world nation status. It was difficult then for especially American manufacturers to advocate going offshore for sourcing when they couldn't fairly measure some of the people outside the United States in their capabilities compared to inside the United States. So on a universal basis, an ISO 9000 standard was set. It's been adapted almost totally by European nations, as well as many Asian nations. And it's a way of setting a standard on a worldwide basis that fairly compares nations regardless of what part of the world they're in. Some of the principles in an ISO 9000 are these 8 principles leading from customer focus, leadership, people involvement, processes, systematic approaches, continual improvement, and so on. And when the ISO 9000 award is a very prestigious award, it costs companies hundreds of thousands of dollars to achieve it, but when they go and apply for the award, they have to satisfy the reviewers on these 8 principles. Many industries can try to apply for it. Hotels are a good example. There are some of the higher end hotels that have spent the money to be recognized for ISO 9000. There's another standard called ISO 14000, which is a little different than a 9000, and it covers environmental management systems, auditing, and performance, and is set up to help organizations set similar standards in the environmental world. The Malcolm Baldrige Award is probably one of the most prestigious awards which identifies quality in organizations. It was established in 1987, trying to emphasize quality in all industries. it recognized that each industry had their own standards and were different, so tried to compensate for that. Malcolm Baldrige himself is a former Secretary of Commerce in the United States, and he was very conscientious about establishing a quality level. And the 8 criteria that we identified just a moment ago are evaluated on point systems, and in order to receive the award, you have to receive a certain amount of points on all of these issues. Again, the criteria that they look at is the leadership, planning, how much emphasis do you put on the customer, do you have measurement, analysis, and knowledge management techniques that give you adequate tools to work with, what's the workforce attitude and how do they perceive their role. Very big emphasis on process, and of course you always look at the bottom line results before you determine if it's successful. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of different industries and categories, from large businesses to small businesses, and Malcolm Baldrige looks at each of these industries in a unique way and doesn't try to throw them all in the same pot and compare them. There are hundreds of examples of winners of this, reflecting the fact that the award is very important. It really works for most of the recipients and helps them win more jobs, because when they can go in and bid on a proposal and identify themselves as a Malcolm Baldrige Award winner, that could make a difference in a competitive situation. Key thing, outsourcing is so tied in to supply chain, which is goes hand in hand with the Baldrige and the ISO 9000 concepts, that when you look at suppliers, now you basically have a standard of how to evaluate them. You certainly within the United States as well as other parts of the world, you want to see if they are ISO 9000 certified, because it's an excellent way of determining in a less subjective way what the qualitative aspects of these organizations are. The key thing is you can't just base your decision entirely on price, and you can have a lot more assurance that you're working with a reliable supplier if you emphasize some of the qualitative aspects of it. In summary, one of the reasons why some organizations fail, and the list is longer than the 4 things we're going to mention, but it's a focus too much on short-term results, and some organizations, they just want to win the order. They'll do whatever it takes to win the order. They won't look at the long-term aspect of how do they fix the real problems and their processes so that they can win the next order. There's a finger-pointing syndrome within organizations where they blame each other or management blames the employee. You have to get away from that. You have to be willing to trade off compromises and not insist that you get one way at the expense of other ways of doing things. And in order to really foster true teamwork, management has to find its role and should be very careful not to overmanage or micromanage in a lot of situations. Why do some companies fail on that, continuing on that theme? Sometimes management doesn't really support some of the efforts that they really have set up. Quite often people resist change. It's a subject in itself, but most of us settle down to a level of comfort where we don't want people to change our world too much on us, and therefore we don't want to see improvements. There's always political rivalries within an organization, and some people just aren't committed to the quality concept, and say it's just a buzzword. And here's one of the most important things. Most organizations don't adequately train people in this area. They put in systems, they drive people to the point of saying, we got to do this, everybody's responsible. And it rests with top management. They have to commit to an adequate level of training if they're going to be successful.